Some jokes disappear the moment they're spoken. Others stay behind, quietly rewinding themselves in your mind until they change the meaning of everything that came before them. I didn't know which kind mine was when I laughed that night. Only know that if I had stayed silent, if I had chosen my words more carefully, my marriage might still look the way it used to from the outside. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this story from? Your presence here truly matters to me. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with love, betrayal, revenge, romance, and suspense, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with someone you care about. Now, let me tell you how everything began. For 11 years, I believed my marriage was stable. Not exciting, not passionate, but steady enough to feel permanent. Daniel and I met in our late 20s. We married quickly, built a life carefully, and learned how to move around each other without friction. We rarely fought. We rarely surprised each other. Our love didn't burn, it hummed quietly in the background, like a machine that had been running so long you forgot what silence sounded like. I thought that meant we were strong. Looking back now, I understand something terrifying. Comfort is not the same as safety. Our days followed patterns, so predictable I could sense them without looking at the clock. Morning coffee together, brief conversations about work, polite affection, evenings that ended side by side but worlds apart. Scrolling through separate screens. Daniel was kind, reliable, calm, and distant. Whenever I tried to talk about that distance, he would smile softly and say I was overthinking. That marriage changed people. That comfort was a good thing. That not every love needed fire. I believed him because believing him was easier than questioning everything. The night everything changed began like dozens before it. Daniel invited his closest friend over for dinner. Evan. Evan had been part of Daniel's life long before I entered it. College roommate, business partner once, best man at our wedding. The kind of friendship people admire because it looks unbreakable. Evan was tall, composed, and unnervingly observant. He spoke less than Daniel, but when he did, people listened. His silence carried weight, as if he were always measuring the room instead of participating in it. I had never disliked him, but I had never trusted him either. There was something about the way he looked at people, not with desire, not with judgment, but with calculation, as though he was always 3 steps ahead of a conversation no one else realized they were having. That evening, I cooked Daniel's favorite meal: roasted chicken, garlic potatoes, a bottle of wine we'd been saving for something special. We laughed, we talked, we pretended to be the kind of people we used to be. The wine loosened memories, college stories, old relationships, embarrassing confessions Daniel hadn't shared with me before. Evan listened, smiling faintly, occasionally adding details. Daniel seemed surprised. He remembered at one point Daniel leaned back in his chair, a little drunk, and laughed. Evan was always the dangerous one, he said. Women loved him. It was said lightly. Nostalgically. Without thinking, without meaning anything deeper, I smiled and said, well, maybe I should have married you instead, Evan. You seem more exciting. I laughed. Daniel laughed. The moment passed, or at least, I thought it did. Evan didn't laugh. He turned toward me slowly, his glass still in his hand, and then he smiled. It wasn't warm, it wasn't playful. It was controlled. You still can, he said. The room went silent. Daniel burst into louder laughter, waving his hand dismissively. All right, that's enough wine for everyone tonight. I laughed too, forcing the sound out of my throat. Relax. It was just a joke. Evan nodded. So was mine, he replied, but something in his voice made my chest tighten. Daniel's phone rang moments later. He excused himself and stepped into the bedroom to take the call, closing the door behind him. That left Evan and me alone in the kitchen. I began clearing plates, suddenly aware of every movement I made. The clink of dishes felt too loud. The air felt heavy. Do you know why jokes make people uncomfortable? Evan asked casually. I shrugged, keeping my eyes on the sink. Because they cross boundaries? No, he said. Because they reveal truths people pretend don't exist. I stopped. Slowly, I turned to face him. I don't know what you're implying. Evan reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and placed it face down on the counter between us. You should, he said quietly. You deserve to. My heart began to race. Deserve what? The truth, he replied. About your husband. That was the moment I should have walked away. Called Daniel back into the room, pretended this conversation never happened. But curiosity is dangerous, and when doubt has already planted itself inside you, truth becomes irresistible even when it promises to hurt. Before I could respond, Daniel returned. Evan straightened instantly, polite again, composed again. The moment shattered like glass. Dinner ended shortly after Evan left. Daniel kissed my cheek and thanked me for the meal, and yet something had already shifted that night. I lay awake beside Daniel, listening to his breathing. Steady, peaceful, familiar. My mind replayed Evan's words again and again. You deserve to know. Around 2 in the morning, I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen. The house creaked softly, as if it were warning me not to continue. I stared at my phone. Evan's contact name was already there. I didn't remember saving his number. I typed a message. "What did you mean earlier?" The reply came almost instantly. "Was wondering how long it would take you." My stomach tightened. "If you have something to say it." A pause. "Then, I can't tell you." "I can show you." My fingers trembled. "Show me what?" "The reason your marriage has felt empty," he replied, "and why it wasn't an accident." A cold wave passed through me. "You're lying." Three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Check his laptop," Evan wrote. The folder named Archive. I froze that folder. Daniel never let me touch his laptop. He always joked that it was boring work files, but I had seen that folder before. Returned to the bedroom. Daniel slept soundly. We've picked up the laptop from the nightstand.
No.
Password. That alone made my chest tighten. I opened the folder and my entire understanding of my marriage collapsed in silence. There were messages, photos, years of conversations, but the most disturbing part wasn't the women, it was the planning. Daniel and Evan had been discussing me, analyzing me, shaping me. They talked about my emotions, the way engineers talk about systems, how easily I blamed myself, how reassurance worked better than confrontation, how distance could be used as leverage. They called it emotional redirection. And suddenly, everything made sense. The coldness, the confusion, the loneliness, I thought was my fault. I closed the laptop slowly. Daniel stood beside me, and in that moment, something inside me changed forever. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I understood. Love had been my weakness, but awareness was power. Morning arrived quietly, as if nothing had happened. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, landing softly on Daniel's face. He looked peaceful, unburdened, like a man who had slept without secrets pressing on his chest. I watched him for a long moment, memorizing the rise and fall of his breath, trying to reconcile this familiar image with a stranger I had discovered only hours earlier. When he opened his eyes and smiled at me, my heart did something strange. It didn't ache. It didn't race. It hardened. "Morning," he said, his voice warm. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I replied. That much was true. He reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "You worry too much." I almost laughed. With 4 years, that sentence had followed me like a shadow. Whenever I felt something was wrong, whenever my instincts whispered warnings, Daniel softened his voice and turned my concern into a flaw. I was emotional, sensitive, overthinking, and I had let him. After he left for work, the house felt unbearably quiet. I made coffee and didn't drink it. I sat at the table and stared at nothing. My mind replayed the messages I had read again and again, each time uncovering a new layer of cruelty hidden beneath polite words and careful phrasing. Daniel hadn't just drifted away from me, he had been guided, encouraged, trained, and Evan had been there the entire time, shaping the distance between us with surgical precision. I opened the laptop again. This time, I didn't rush. I read slowly, methodically, forcing myself to absorb everything. Without flinching, the conversations between them stretched back nearly 8 years, beginning innocently enough complaints about stress, about routine, about marriage losing its edge. Evan's replies were always calm, measured, manipulative. He never told Daniel what to do directly. Instead, he asked questions. He planted ideas, offered observations disguised as concern. "She seems anxious lately. Do you think reassurance is helping or making her dependent? She trusts you deeply. That kind of trust can be shaped. Distance doesn't break bonds. Confusion does." Reading those words felt like being dissected, while still alive. They talked about my emotions as if they were switches to be flipped. They celebrated small successes, missed calls that made me apologize, moments when I questioned my own worth, nights when I tried harder while Daniel pulled further away. They called those moments progress. By the time I closed the laptop, my hands were steady. Shock had burned itself out, leaving something colder behind. Clarity. I realized then that my pain had followed a pattern. Every time I grew more confident, more grounded, something would happen to destabilize me. A sudden coldness, an argument that ended without I realized then that my pain had followed a pattern. Every time I grew more confident, more grounded, something would happen to destabilize me. A sudden coldness, an argument that ended without resolution. A comparison to someone else's marriage, someone else's success. I had thought it was coincidence. It had been. Choreography. My vibrated. A message from Evan. "You're quiet." I stared at the screen, feeling a flicker of satisfaction. Silenced, unsettled men like him. Men who believed they controlled the narrative panicked when the story stopped responding. I typed back carefully. "I'm processing." The reply came quickly. "That's good. Most people never do." I exhaled slowly. "Why?" "Now," I wrote. "Why tell me any of this?" This time, he didn't answer right away. Minutes passed then. "Because plans evolve." That sentence followed me all day. Plans evolve. Not end. Not fail. Change. That evening, Daniel came home with flowers. "Just because," he said. handing them to me with a smile that once would have melted me. I thanked him, kissed his cheek, played my role flawlessly. Inside, I watched him like a stranger, wearing my husband's face. During dinner he talked about work, about stress, about nothing that mattered. He didn't mention Evan, he didn't mention distance. He didn't notice the way I listened instead of confided. After dinner, he reached for me, his touch familiar and practiced. I let him dot, not because I wanted closeness, because I wanted information. Later, that night, while he slept, I checked his phone. I wasn't shaking anymore. There were no messages from Evan. That absence felt deliberate, calculated. I understood then that Evan had shifted the board. He had revealed the truth not to free me, but to reposition himself. Daniel was no longer the center of the plan. I was the next few days, unfolded like a test. Evan texted occasionally. Brief messages, observations, questions disguised as concerned. How are you holding up? Have you noticed how he reacts when you pull back? Awareness is uncomfortable at first, I replied sparingly. Enough to keep him engaged, not enough to give him power. Daniel, meanwhile, became more attentive. Compliments, small gifts, gentle apologies for things he couldn't quite name. Guilt, I realized, was finally catching up to him. But guilt didn't erase damage, it only revealed fear. On the fourth day, Evan asked to meet, just to talk. He wrote, "Some things are better explained in person." I agreed, not because I trusted him, but because I needed to see him clearly, without Daniel's shadow blurring my judgment. We met at a quiet cafe across town, neutral ground. Public enough to feel safe, private enough to talk. Evan looked exactly the same, calm, controlled, unreadable. But when his eyes met mine, something flickered. Interest, not desire. Curiosity. "You look different," he said as we sat down. "I feel different," I replied. He smiled slightly. "That's awareness." "No," I said calmly. "That's betrayal." The smile faded. "I didn't create your marriage," Evan said after a moment. "I exposed its weaknesses." "You exploited them?" I corrected. He leaned back, studying me. "You're stronger than Daniel ever gave you credit for, and yet you used him to break me." "I refined him," Evan replied. "He came to me because he was unhappy. I showed him how to understand that unhappiness." I laughed softly. "You taught him how to hollow me out." He didn't deny it. Instead, he said, "And now you see it." The silence stretched between us. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally. Evan's gaze didn't waver. Alignment. The word settled heavily between us. "You're leaving him," he continued, with an hour later. "When you do, you'll need someone who understands what you've been through, and you think that's you." "I know it is." There it was, the truth beneath everything. I looked at him, then really looked at the confidence, the control, the lack of remorse. And I understood something vital. Evan didn't destroy people because he hated them. He did it because he needed to feel superior to them, because control was his currency, and he had finally miscalculated. I smiled at him softly, convincingly. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe I do need someone who understands." His eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. "I'll think about it," I added. That uncertainty pleased him. He liked people who hesitated. When I left the cafe, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Can we talk tonight?" I stared at the screen. Yes, I thought we could talk, but the conversation he wanted was already too late, because while the men in my life had been planning, analyzing, and controlling, I had been learning. And once you understand the game, you don't play to survive, play to end it. The days that followed became a delicate performance. I wore the mask of the woman Daniel believed he knew, warm, affectionate, slightly hesitant. I laughed at the right moments, smiled at his jokes, and touched his arm when expected. Every gesture was calculated, every word measured. Inside, however, I was no longer the woman they had built. I was an observer, recording, analyzing, planning. Daniel didn't notice. He thought I was fragile, that the distance in our marriage had succeeded. He had no idea that the discovery of Evan's manipulations had transformed me from a passive participant into a strategist. Evan, on the other hand, did notice. "You're calmer than I expected," he texted one morning. I didn't reply. Silence unsettled him more than anger ever could. That afternoon, I went through Daniel's routines. Not obsessively, not checked, but carefully. The times he checked his phone, the moments he avoided certain topics, the way he hesitated when speaking about the past. Every action revealed patterns. Every pattern revealed weakness. I realized something terrifying. Evan had underestimated me. He had assumed that because he knew how to manipulate, I would remain the predictable subject. But awareness changes the rules. Once you see the strings, you start to follow them backward to the puppeteer. By evening, Daniel came home, cheerful and unsuspecting. He kissed me, commented on my day, and talked about work. I listened carefully, pretending to be the same wife he had known. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying Evan's messages, the hidden folder on Daniel's laptop, and the calculated cruelty that had been normalized in our lives. When he left the room briefly to check a text, I quietly opened his laptop, not his messages, not his emails, but files I had previously overlooked. Hidden receipts, photos, and correspondence revealed layers of involvement I hadn't realized existed. Some of it was innocuous, but some suggested premeditation, far deeper than I had imagined. It was clear now. Evan had not merely guided Daniel, he had orchestrated. And Daniel, blinded by loyalty and friendship, had followed. I did not feel panic, I felt clarity. Clarity allowed me to see the opportunities, the leverage I had in this situation. Instead of feeling betrayed, I began to plan. And when a plan forms, in your mind, action becomes inevitable. That night I sent Evan a single message. I know. The reply was immediate. Careful. You don't know everything yet. I know enough, I typed. There was a pause. Then, you're bold, dangerous. I smiled, reading the words. Dangerous, perhaps. But this time, not in the way he imagined. Over the next week I tested them both. I pulled back from Daniel just slightly, enough to see the cracks in his behavior. The guilt, the hesitation, the subtle anxiety he tried to hide. He was no longer in control of the emotional distance he had once engineered. I watched him stumble over words, apologize too much, and seek reassurance in ways I had long ignored. Meanwhile, Evan continued to watch. His messages were frequent but cautious. Like a predator, unsure of its prey's next move. You're learning fast, he wrote one evening. Faster than I expected, I replied. The silence after my message was telling. For the first time, Evan realized he had underestimated me. Then came the perfect opportunity. Daniel told me he had a business dinner out of town one night. Nothing unusual. He smiled as he left, confident and relaxed, believing the house and his wife were as predictable as ever. As soon as the door clicked shut, I moved. I gathered all the information I had collected. Evan's messages, the folders on Daniel's laptop, the receipts, and the timeline of manipulations. Everything. I printed some files, organized the digital evidence, and prepared a sequence of actions that would ensure that when the moment came, I would have the upper hand. It wasn't about revenge, at least. Not yet. It was about control. Later that night, Evan texted, "Do you want to meet?" I paused. "Yes," I replied. We agreed on a quiet cafe far from familiar streets, neutral territory. I paused. "Yes," I replied. We agreed on a quiet cafe far from familiar streets, neutral territory, public enough to feel safe, private enough to discuss without interruptions. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting straight-backed, hands clasped, eyes observing. He had the same calm composure, the same unsettling presence. But I was no longer intimidated. Not in the slightest. "You've changed," he said. I smiled faintly. "You underestimated me." He leaned back, regarding me carefully. "Bold. I like it. And dangerous?" He paused. "Yes, dangerous, but calculated, I hope." "I've learned from the best," I replied softly. For hours, we spoke in veiled terms. He tried to test me, to probe for weakness. I answered carefully, revealing just enough to appear uncertain but holding back everything that mattered. I left the cafe with a new certainty. I was no longer the manipulated. I was the one planning now. Evan may have taught Daniel how to manipulate me, but he had inadvertently taught me how to outthink both of them. Once you see the strings, you stop being a puppet. You become the puppeteer. Next morning, Daniel called. "Can we talk tonight?" I stared at the phone and smiled. Yes, we could talk. But the conversation would not be what he expected, because while Daniel and Evan had been playing their game, I had rewritten the rules. And once rules are rewritten, no one escapes unscathed. For Daniel's call that evening felt ordinary, but I knew better. He arrived home carrying the same practiced smile, flowers in hand, as if the world had not shifted beneath our feet. I took the flowers, kissed his cheek, and let the mask slip perfectly into place. Warm, appreciative, slightly fragile, everything he expected. Everything Evan expected. But beneath the surface, my mind was racing. Every word, every gesture, every expression was measured. Every breath I took was part of the plan forming silently in my head. They had thought I was broken. They had thought I was compliant. They had underestimated me. Dinner passed as a routine. Daniel spoke of work, of trivial problems, of things he thought mattered. I listened, smiled, laughed at his jokes, touched his hand just enough to seem tender. Every subtle action was designed to coax information, to reveal the cracks in his confidence, to test his loyalty to the man he called friend. After dessert, he excused himself to make a phone call. I lingered in the kitchen, pretending to clean dishes, while silently strategizing my next moves. Evan's words from our meeting replayed in my mind. "Once you see the strings, you stop being a puppet." I had seen them all now, and I was ready. That night, Daniel fell asleep beside me, his breathing even, trusting, Unaware, I lay awake, thinking, planning. He didn't know that awareness is power. That knowledge shifts balance, that a woman who has been carefully dismantled can rebuild herself from the inside, stronger, sharper, and more dangerous than ever before. By morning, I had decided it was time to act. I began subtly changing my behavior. I pulled back just enough to unsettle Daniel, to see how he would react. He noticed immediately the way he lingered near me, the way he hesitated before speaking, his frequent glances toward the bedroom door, as if wondering whether I would retreat further or confront him. I was studying him now, analyzing each gesture, each word, each hesitation. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer reacting to their manipulations. I was directing them, quietly, deliberately. Evan's messages continued. You're progressing faster than expected. Good. Are you ready for the next step? I ignored the last one. Silence was my weapon now. He had relied on control, on predictability. I gave him uncertainty. Daniel's behavior changed noticeably. He became more attentive, almost anxious. He complimented me, offered small gifts, apologized unnecessarily. He tried to anchor me back to the comfort he had assumed I needed, but I didn't need comfort. I needed leverage. Days later, Daniel mentioned a business trip. One night, out of town, the opportunity I had been waiting for had arrived. As soon as he left, I moved quickly. I gathered all my evidence, messages, photos, folders, timelines. I organized everything meticulously, preparing a sequence of actions that would ensure I held the upper hand. This wasn't about revenge yet. It was about control. By evening, I sent Evan a single message. We need to talk. The reply was immediate. Careful. You don't know everything yet. I know enough, I wrote. Back a pause. Then, you're bold. Dangerous. I smiled. Dangerous. I smiled. Dangerous. Perhaps, but not in the way he imagined. The meeting with Evan was set at a quiet, neutral cafe. He was already there when I arrived. Sitting straight-backed, calm/composed. He regarded me like he always did, measuring, calculating, searching. But I was no longer intimidated. I was confident. Control. I had learned his methods, and now I could predict his moves. You've changed, he said. I've learned from you, I replied. He tilted his head, smiling faintly. Bold and dangerous. I nodded. Calculated. Everything I do now is intentional. For hours, we spoke indirectly. He tried to probe to test me, but I answered only what I wanted him to know. Carefully, deceptively, I revealed uncertainty, but held back everything critical. When I left, I felt a shift. Evan had underestimated me. He believed he still had influence over my decisions, over the situation. But that influence had already slipped through his fingers. The following morning, Daniel texted, "Can we talk tonight?" I smiled at my phone. Yes. We could talk, but the conversation would not be what he expected. Because while Daniel and Evan had been plotting, analyzing, and controlling, I had learned everything. I had absorbed their methods, their strategies, their weaknesses. And once you see the strings, you don't just stop being a puppet. You become the one who pulls them. The stage was set, and I had already begun the first moves of my plan. The conversation Daniel wanted finally came, but not the way he expected. He sat across from me at the dining table, his fingers wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. His eyes searched my face, trying to read me the way he used to, trying to find the familiar woman who had softened first, would apologize for tension she hadn't created. She wasn't there anymore. I feel like something's wrong, he said carefully. You've been distant. I met his gaze, calm and steady. Have I? He frowned. You're different. Yes, I replied. I am. The silence between us stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Daniel shifted in his chair, already uneasy. He was used to control, to predictability. This version of me didn't fit the pattern he had memorized. I know I haven't been perfect, he continued. Work's been stressful. I've been distracted, but I love you. The words used to mean something. Now, they sounded rehearsed. Do you? I asked softly. He looked startled. Of course I do. For how long are you pressed? And under whose guidance? His face drained of color. Why would you say that? He asked, too quickly. I leaned back, folding my arms. How long have you been listening to Evan about our marriage? The room went very still. Daniel's jaw tightened. His eyes flickered away for just a second, long enough. You talked to him, he said quietly. I read everything. I corrected every message, every plan, every analysis. His hands trembled. I never meant for it to go this far, Daniel said finally. I was unhappy, confused. Evan just helped me understand what I was feeling. He helped you dismantle me, I said. Slowly, intentionally. Daniel shook his head, running a hand through his hair. He said it would make us stronger, that if you leaned on me more, we'd reconnect, by breaking me first. Ayashi didn't answer. Silence, once again, told the truth. I trusted him, Daniel whispered. He's been my friend for years, and I was your wife. I replied. 4:11. The words landed heavily between us. I watched as the reality settled in, the guilt, the fear, the realization that he had crossed a line that couldn't be erased with apologies. I don't know how to fix this, he said. You don't? I replied calmly. That was the moment something in him broke. Daniel leaned forward, desperation replacing confidence. Tell me what to do. I'll do anything. I studied him carefully. This was the man who had once believed he could reshape me. Now he was asking for direction, for permission, for rescue. Power had shifted. You're going to tell Evan you're done, I said. Completely. Daniel hesitated. He won't like that. I know, I replied. That's the point. That night, Daniel sent a message. I watched him type it. This has gone too far. I'm done. Don't contact me again. His phone buzzed. Almost immediately. Evan didn't reply with anger. He replied with precision. She's manipulating you now. The message read. This is exactly what I warned you about. Daniel looked at me, panic in his eyes. He's trying to turn me against you. I smiled faintly. Now you understand how it felt. Over the next few days, Evan didn't disappear. He escalated. Messages. 2. Daniel. Calls that went unanswered. Subtle threats disguised as concern. He tried to pull Daniel back into alignment, to reassert control over a man he had shaped for years. But something had changed. Daniel was afraid. Now, and fear makes people honest. Problem. Double quotes. He problem. Neither were you, I replied, until you chose to be. There was a long pause. Then, you think. Daniel was afraid now, and fear makes people honest. He knows too much, Daniel said one night. About us. About you. I met his gaze. So do I. Then Evan contacted me directly. You've overplayed your hand, he wrote. Daniel was never the problem. Neither were you, I replied, until you chose to be. There was a long pause. Then you think you've won. You haven't. I stared at the screen, unshaken. No, I typed. I think I've ended you. The following morning, Daniel's phone rang. He answered it, listened silently, then slowly lowered the phone. What is it? I asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. He knows, he said. Everything. And he's not going to stop. I nodded calmly. Good, I said, because that meant Evan was about to make a mistake, and mistakes were all I needed. I began preparing the final step. Not out of rage, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. Some people don't stop when asked. They stop when exposed. The game was no longer about survival, it was about conclusion.